Hi,
Hello.
Alessio.
Hi. Hi, Jude. It's our third episode, isn't it?
It's our third episode. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
good to see you.
Likewise. And as
Yeah.
I connect with you, I'm thinking of kind of wanting to thank all the positive
Yeah,
feedback
definitely.
and
Yeah.
um, comments that we received that definitely have kind of showed us that we want to do more of this. So here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, when we put the first two out, we didn't make a lot of noise about it, but we yeah, put them out there, and then there's been some really beautiful comments from people, feedback, people sharing it, and yeah, just really appreciating that there's interest in this in our little corner of
Yes.
queer neurodivergent IFS. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful.
Mm.
And just to name this, but in the future we might have guests. So if anybody listens to this podcast
Yeah.
and maybe wants to contribute to this discussion on neuroqueering, neurodiversity, or queerness, well, they can contact us.
Yeah. Yeah. You can contact us. We'll have our email addresses and websites and things in the show notes. And you can
Yes.
always just Google us and reach out. Yeah, we'd love to widen this conversation. Yeah, because we know we're not the only two.
We are not.
Yeah.
So today it's pronouns,
It is,
isn't
and
it?
I'm not even showing my pronouns.
And I actually am. They are fixed
Oh, my pronouns.
on my Zoom. Well,
Yeah.
as you sort out, you're so quick. It would have taken me much longer to sort out my pronouns there. So, where do we start? There's so
Great
much
question.
on this one.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with why is this topic important to us? Why did
Yes,
we want to do an episode on pronouns?
yes,
Yeah. And I guess one thing that is immediately apparent to me is how important understanding pronouns is when navigating parts work in IFS, and
yes,
how important it is to work with our client systems to ensure that we are referring to them and their parts in a way that is correct for the system.
yes. Yeah, thank you for this reminder, Jude, because I know that we introduced a section of our conference presentation on pronouns, and we had to pack a lot into a couple of
Yeah.
slides. Um, so, and I remember you introducing this idea of really respecting the person and the part's pronouns in ways that I hadn't really considered before. So
Okay.
that's right. Like I'm still deeply impacted by that conversation. So I'm happy we are having it
Yeah.
again in a more public space. And I'm also remembered of how that pronoun has been very meaningful to me. And maybe it's one of the ways that we bonded together, you and I, because of
Yeah.
that. Oh, I use he, they, and you said I use she, they. And immediately something happened
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And it's an experience I keep on noticing whenever I am um, in in the staff of any IFS training, whether I am a program assistant or maybe I'm a part of the leadership team. Just the meaningfulness of sharing that pronoun, it opens up doors. It allows people to come over a cup of tea to kind of share their pronoun, perhaps. So yeah,
Yeah.
it is a beautiful impact in my experience,
Yeah.
both internally and externally.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. And I think yeah, so I use she, they pronouns. And for me that was what am I trying to say here? I think I was always very supportive of pronouns, people using pronouns. But I think I had to do some work in my own system with parts to give permission for me to use she, they pronouns. Because there was some kind of question about taking up space, or because and but maybe we'll talk about this in another episode another time. But for me, I mean, I am in a very heteronormative passing relationship, and so I get misgendered a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about that with my parts that when I was working out my own pronouns was really had to do some work around that. And actually what really allowed this to sink in for me was working with so many clients who were exploring their pronouns and their gender identities and their sexual identities and many other their identities generally. And realizing I was always coming into things like Zoom calls without my pronouns there because I wasn't quite sure what I was doing. And when I finally took the step to change my email signature and change my Zoom bit, it felt so freeing. It felt so right. And I think that was such an interesting learning for me that that feeling of self affirming could be so powerful that pronouns have always been important to me, as in honoring our clients and where they are. But my own personal experience of that really made me realize how important this is. And I think
Yeah.
that's another reason I really feel passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I listen to you, I'm thinking of my relationship with the pronouns and how I got to using them. And, I'm hearing your perspective, your journey. And I also had a journey. And it's beautiful how different can be these different journeys, right? Because we come from different backgrounds, and in general, I am in a homosexual relationship, and yet the misgendering keeps on happening regardless. And it's somehow, I think my system is still holding some burdens around gender in a certain way, because the gender journey has been quite bumpy to the point that even right now, and I was having this conversation this morning actually via text message with a very dear and extremely respectful, beautiful colleague and friend of mine who's Italian, and he asked about my pronouns, and in Italian it's like, what is, we don't have it, but that's another chapter, maybe another podcast. But one of the questions was, do I use the masculine or the feminine with you? And my system has one thing that's clear, that somehow for some of my parts, the feminine pronoun just doesn't land well because of how many times it's been used to attack me, to bully me, to somewhat convey that I wasn't manly enough. So in my landscape internally is very fluid. So there is just a lot of diversity. Many parts of mine don't really buy into the binary. That's why I sometimes like to describe myself as non-binary. And some other times parts have either masculine or feminine energies, identities. We'll go into that later, I'm sure. And it's more appropriate to say that I'm gender fluid. And I didn't know how to capture that. It's quite difficult to kind of explain what that means. It's difficult for people sometimes to ask. And I'm always welcoming of people asking when they meet me. And there's been very rich conversations coming out of people, very respectfully and gently asked me to say more, because it was difficult for me, and I had to go online and check and inform myself as to what these things are, and they're largely self-made. Like, I'm describing what that means for me, and I am choosing these pronouns because they represent me, but it wasn't easy, because I think that the he, they was used by someone else before I could kind of say, okay, yeah, that's mine. Otherwise, I would have had to create it in a way, because it might not exist. In English, many exist. But look at Italian. What do you do? In Italian, everything is masculine or feminine, even objects. Like the chair is feminine, the table is masculine. For no reason. Imagine for a person who has a male body, what kind of difficulty that creates. So,
there's no they
there
in
is no
Italian
they.
in the way that we use they, as in for she, they, he, they, or they, them. Gender identities. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
And hearing you talk there, I really echo that sense. My internal world is very fluid, and I would say most of my parts don't have a gender, and some do. But then this is the conversation that we were having before, wasn't it, about how some parts actually the gender might be representative of something. So some of my exiles are she, her, but that can sometimes that has also been about some of the burdens of expectations of what a little girl should be in itself.
Yes.
Yeah. And some of my parts, a few are masculine as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But most of them.
Yeah.
Somewhere else. Something else.
Yeah. Which kind of gets me to one of the more theoretical points here. Gender as a social construct means that if we were born in a different society, then we would perhaps not even think of gender, and would that impact our parts? Like, in the absence of gender as a social construct, if it didn't exist, would our parts ever bring up the topic? Or not? Or do they bring it up just because it's meaningful for society, or because it's been hurtful one way or another and burdens have been created around it?
It's such a fascinating question. And then in societies where more than two genders already, exist.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, not more than two genders exist everywhere.
Yes.
But where that is accepted and really quite normalized, what impact does that have?
Yes.
Yeah.
And which kind of brings me to that question that we put in our presentation, but I still remember when we were discussing it for our workshop, when, because even when we work with parts internally, the question of gender comes up. And it can come up in many ways by either the therapist asking, is it a she or a he, or assuming without even asking, gendering a part. So we get into this almost constant, almost gendering. What gender is the part? And who is that coming from? And it can come from this system of the therapist, or from within the system of the client, and maybe even within the system, some part is gendering another part without letting that part, the target one, express themselves first.
Right. So in the way that our protectors can often tell the story of the little ones.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of a different conversation that we had, which was about our experience around this topic and our experience when we've been PAs, program assistants, and when we've been working with practice groups and noticing the way that therapists can often make an assumption about the gender of a client's parts based on the either assumed or not necessarily assumed, or what's the word I'm looking for? Specified gender of the client. So if the client is presenting or says I use she her pronouns, then the therapist making the assumption then that all of the parts in the system are also she, her.
Yes.
And can you go to her? How does she feel about that, without checking that out with the client or checking that out with the part first?
Yes. Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
we've both seen that an awful lot.
Yes, because I mean, for the listeners or watchers who haven't been on a level 1 training, the program assistants are members of staff who supervise small groups of participants. So we see people at the first attempts to use IFS, and it's one of those things that maybe you and I notice, Jude, right? And maybe it still gets unnoticed largely.
Yes. Yeah.
By
Right.
the community, because maybe there are other things that as program assistants we need to watch out for. We are looking for the accurate use of certain steps, so we need to kind of select what kind of feedback we give. But I think the important aspect of this conversation that we're having now is that maybe more people can become curious as you listen to this podcast as to what assumptions do you make or are you making about other people's systems.
Absolutely. And I just want to say as well, it feels important to say the subject of pronouns can bring up a lot of anxiety in people.
Yes.
Fear of getting it wrong, worried that they're going to upset someone or be shamed even in making a mistake.
Yes.
And we certainly don't want to fuel that fire.
Yes.
And so the most important thing is just being like you just said, Alessio, being aware of the assumptions that we might make and being curious, staying with that sea of curiosity with our clients, to not assume that. And so if I'm working with somebody and they're connecting with a part, I will just say they, unless the client has already specified a gender, she, he, or a different way they want to refer to a part, it. I always start with they, and then say, does that feel right for you? And give them the opportunity to give the part the opportunity to say yes or no, or I prefer this. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, we don't have to go into every situation with a big list of pronouns and get it all right. But we can go in and say, does that feel right? I've heard you using her. Does that feel okay for me to say her?
Yes.
Does the part feel okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for specifying that fear of getting it wrong, of misgendering, because I think I certainly have parts with that fear, especially as a transition from English, where I can use they, it, to Italian, where these don't exist. And how uncomfortable sometimes it is to having to be forced to use grammatically and to give a gender to the words that I use, because many parts of the spoken and written language are gendered, and how uncomfortable it is for me for some parts of me to get it wrong, because because it is part of or what moves us away from curiosity, from, oh, well, this is difficult. This isn't an easy one. There is a lot of burden around gendering and misgendering. If I think of, if I go to a place and I misgender a man, it could result in quite some upset. And similarly for a cisgender woman who's been misgendered. So it is a big thing that we are navigating. And as you say, there are many layers. There is the gendering that the therapist does to a system, but there is also, inside of the system, some people might assume that all of their parts are, for example, little girls. And as you said, sometimes it's important to ask and check with the part themselves if that particular form of gendering is relevant for them or not. And I want to say this piece before I think we're coming towards an end anyway, but it's also to kind of be sensitive to the fact that each system has a different relationship to gender. And I say that to my people I supervise or people I teach the model to, that in my system, gender is a big thing.
Yes.
But in some other system, it is not.
Yeah.
So what we are describing here might be very helpful and respectful and meaningful for systems who have experienced some form of difficulties around gender, but for some other systems, all the pronouns might not be relevant. And I just want to mention that because I don't want people to start feeling that they need to.
Right.
I don't know why I'm saying this exactly, but.
Well, I guess it's like, I think there's something, that this doesn't have to be like a big stressful thing.
Yes.
But it's just having that kind of awareness, and maybe it is helpful to read something around kind of and understand different pronouns. Maybe it is helpful to do that if this concept is completely new to you. If to be, so that your clients aren't having to educate you. And beyond that, it is about just holding that curiosity and recognizing there's parts within us that don't want to get it wrong, that might be defensive around that, or might be avoidant of pronouns for that reason. Or then we might have parts in us that are unsure, or even maybe we've had experiences of being misgendered. So there might be plenty going on within us, or maybe gender is something we've never had to think about. And the same as you, Alessio, it's something that I have thought about an awful lot in terms of myself, but also because I'm working at this queer neurodivergent intersection, and it's very relevant with my clients as well. And it's okay if you've never had to think about this for yourself. It's okay if it's never even occurred to you, or you've never felt that you're gender assigned, or the way you were born, raised, and socialized as male or female is wrong for you. That's okay. You can still but you can still hold that curiosity with your clients and with your colleagues and with people who might be gender diverse or gender ambivalent or gender queer.
Yeah.
There was one thing I also wanted to say that's important, I think, that to recognize that using pronouns can for some people also be exclusionary.
So again,
can be exclusionary. So for some people, actually, who maybe are more gender fluid, or for lots of reasons, their system, the labels of I am, she, her, or he, him, or even they, them, they don't work for them. And so just to be sensitive as well, that we sharing pronouns is a choice, and not everybody has set pronouns, and not everybody identifies with pronouns at all.
Right. Yes.
And so we can respect that in systems too. It should be it can be an invitation to share pronouns, and we can lead with that, but we can also, we don't have to force people into
Absolutely.
something that doesn't feel right for them too.
Yeah. And the beauty of IFS is that the model allows this very freeing exploration of gender and gender identities. And many people, including me, when starting to meet parts at the beginning, I remember meeting these parts who identify as female, and it was so liberating for them to have space inside that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
So there are huge rewards almost in leading with curiosity, not feeling trapped in having to get it right, but just be there, be self-led, and allow these experiences to emerge.
And allow our clients to let us know what works for them, what works for their system, and allow their parts to let their client know and to let us know what works for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Shall we wrap it up on this one?
Yeah. Okay. So that was a deep dive into pronouns. Where can people find out more about you, Alessio?
So mainly my website, therapywithalessio.com. I keep on updating the website with the various different projects that I'm doing. So that's the best way to connect with me. And what about you, Jude?
Yes, as I'm desperately trying to remember my website address.
Anchored in
Again,
Self?
it's the best way, anchoredinself.co.uk, or email me at hello@anchoredinself.co.uk. I'm not so great at updating my website, but who knows, one day. And just thanks again to everybody for listening and sharing this and liking this and letting us know that what we're saying is relevant to you, and we hope today is too.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you all, and keep on sharing it with anybody who might be interested in listening to us.
Yeah. Okay. Bye
Bye.
for now.
See you next time.